They mocked her stance, her rifle worn, whispered doubts, and scorn was born. But in the shadows, secrets creep. Only vipers train so deep. If you love powerful stories of courage and determination, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode like this. Now, let's dive into the incredible journey of a woman who refused to be underestimated, the story of how they laughed at her rifle and how she proved them all wrong. The sun had barely climbed over the flat rooftops of Ironwood, a modest military town tucked between pine-covered hills and a slow, winding river. You could smell coffee brewing from the diner on Main Street and hear the distant hum of a bus. Headed toward the base, Emily Hart walked with a steady pace through the gravel lot toward the training range. She was dressed in her standard fatigues, neat, clean, nothing flashy. Her boots, though scuffed from years of use, were polished enough to reflect the light. Across her back was slung the rifle that would draw more attention than she wanted. That morning, it was an older M14, modified by hand. The wood stock had been carefully refinished, the scope wasn't standard issue, and the sling was the same one her father had used during his service. Worn soft by decades of use, she could already hear the voices of the younger recruits and some of the more cocky trainees before she even reached the firing line. "Look at that thing," one man chuckled. "What is this, a museum piece?" Another voice piped up, dripping with sarcasm. "Careful, boys. If she points that thing at you, it might fire a cloud of dust." Emily kept her eyes forward. She'd learned long ago that answering back too quickly just gave them more to chew on. The insults slid over her like rain on a coat. But each word was filed away in her mind. She remembered who said what. She set her rifle down on the bench. Her hands moved with slow precision, checking the chamber, adjusting the scope, settling the sling across her shoulder. One of the men, broad-shouldered with an easy grin that said he'd never been told no, often, stepped closer. "Seriously, Hart, you planning to hunt deer or pass basic? You know the rest of us use real rifles." That got a ripple of laughter from the group. Emily looked at him for a long second, her hazel eyes calm but steady. "A real rifle's the one that hits where you aim," she said. He smirked and turned away like he'd already won something. From the corner of her eye, Emily saw a figure approaching. Chief Instructor Mason Kane, a man in his early 60s, weathered from decades in the field. He had a way of walking that made everyone on the range straighten their backs without thinking. Mason stopped just behind Emily, watching her work. She felt the weight of his gaze, but he didn't speak until she finished setting her sights. "You always train like this?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir," Emily replied. He nodded once, then leaned a little closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Only vipers train like that." Emily froze for a moment, unsure if she'd heard right. The Vipers were a special operations unit she'd only heard stories about, a group known for precision shooting, endurance, and an unshakable calm under fire. Most of the town thought they were half-myth. Before she could reply, Mason straightened and addressed the group. "All right, everyone, positions." The rest of the morning passed in bursts of gunfire and shouted commands. Emily's rifle cracked sharp and clean, each shot deliberate. When the targets were reeled back in, hers were tight clusters. No wasted rounds. But the mocking didn't stop at lunch. Emily sat alone at the far table in the mess hall, nursing a bowl of chicken soup. The chatter in the room rolled over her like static until one sentence caught her ear. She only got in because her daddy was a soldier, someone said. Emily's jaw tightened. Her father had been more than a soldier. He'd been the kind of man who stayed late to teach others, who never bragged about the medals in his drawer. He was gone now, years in the ground after an accident that had nothing to do with war. but left her family hollow. She wanted to say something to defend him, but she knew the truth didn't matter to people who didn't want to hear it. That night, in her small one-room apartment above the hardware store, Emily cleaned her rifle. With the same care she'd been taught as a child. Her father's voice seemed to echo in her head. People will laugh until they're scared, and they'll only be scared when they see you can't be broken. She didn't know yet why Mason had whispered those words about the Vipers. But she knew this much. She was going to earn respect here, even if she had to bleed for it. The next morning's drill was different. Mason had set up a long-range challenge across uneven ground. Wind gusted down the hills, making the flags flutter and the dust shift in little swirls. "This is about more than accuracy," Mason told them. "It's about patience. It's about reading your surroundings. You won't all finish. That's fine. The ones who do will have earned something." Emily could feel the others glancing at her, waiting for her to fail. She settled her cheek against the stock, breathing slow, counting each gust of wind, adjusting without hurry. The first shot cracked. Dead center dot the second. Same dot by the fifth. The murmurs had gone quiet dot when Mason walked past her station. His eyes flicked to the grouping on her target. His mouth didn't move much, but there was the hint of a smile. Later, as they packed up, he called out, "Heart, stay behind." She waited until the others had gone before stepping forward. "You shoot like a ghost," Mason said. "Where'd you learn?" Emily hesitated. "My father taught me. We trained almost every weekend. He said the rifle was just an extension of your mind. You calm your mind, you control the shot." Mason nodded, like the answer confirmed something. "We're running a specialized course starting next week. Smaller group, harder conditions. You'll be in it." Emily knew better than to look too eager. "Yes, sir." As she left the range, the cold air filling her lungs, she allowed herself the smallest of smiles. They could laugh all they wanted. They didn't know it yet, but the game had just changed. The frost on the training field crunched under Emily's boots as she walked toward the assembly area. The morning sky was a pale gray, the kind that made the world feel quiet, like it was holding its breath. Mason Kane stood at the front, his cap pulled low, hands behind his back. Beside him was a smaller, wiry man with sharp eyes that scanned the recruits like he was picking out weaknesses before anyone even moved. Emily had never seen him before. "This," Mason began, "is Sergeant Leo Briggs. He's here to help run the specialized course I told you about." His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of something harder. "This is not standard training. You will be cold. You will be tired. You will fail, and then you'll get back up. If you can't, you'll be cut. I don't care if you're the best shot or the fastest runner. If you quit, you're gone." There were only 8 recruits in this group, Emily among them. Most were men, older than her, their confidence radiating in the way they stood. Except for a younger, stockier guy named Tyler Brooks, who kept glancing around like he wasn't sure he belonged here. Briggs stepped forward. "First task, 2 miles across uneven terrain, full gear. You'll carry a 20-pound sandbag. Drop it, you're out. Go." The group surged forward, boots thudding against frozen ground. The terrain wasn't forgiving. Rocks, half-frozen mud, and low brush that snagged on their gear. The sandbag over Emily's shoulder dug into her collarbone, each step sending a dull ache down her spine. Half a mile in, she heard a muffled curse behind her. Tyler had slipped, his sandbag rolling down a shallow embankment. She slowed, glanced. Back. He looked at her, embarrassed. "Go on. Don't wait for me." She could have, but her father's words came back to her. A real team leaves no one behind. Emily jogged back, grabbed the sandbag, and shoved it into Tyler's arms. "Hold on to it this time," she said. then started forward again. By the time they reached the finish point, Emily was breathing hard, her legs burning. A few of the others were already there, smirking. The broad-shouldered man who'd mocked her rifle, Davis, gave a low chuckle. Slowing down to help the kid? That's not how you win. Emily didn't answer. Mason and Briggs weren't looking at the first to arrive. They were watching the last ones come in. Tyler and her. Briggs gave a short nod. Not bad. The next few days blurred into a grind of drills. Shooting in the rain, running obstacle courses blindfolded, holding positions for hours in the biting wind. Emily's hands grew raw from the cold, her muscles screamed, and more than once she found herself fighting the urge to just stop. But she kept moving. One night, after a particularly brutal day, she lingered on the range after everyone else had gone. The stars were bright, the air sharp in her lungs. She set up her rifle, sighting in on a target so far downrange it was barely visible. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the empty field. That's not bad, a voice said behind her. She turned to find Mason standing in the shadows, watching. You ever wonder why I said that thing about the Vipers? He asked. Emily lowered the rifle. Yes, sir. Mason stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. The Vipers don't just shoot well. They think differently. They're patient, and they know when to move fast and when to wait. I saw that in you. She hesitated. So? You think I could be one of them? He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I think you could be better. But there's something you need to understand. Being a Viper isn't about glory. It's about sacrifice. You'll be hated more than you're respected. And you'll have to live with doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything. The words sat heavy in the air. Emily didn't answer right away. She thought about the laughter, the insults, the way people assumed she didn't belong. If this path meant proving them wrong, and proving to herself she was more than they saw, she was willing to walk it. I'm in, she said. Mason nodded once, then turned to leave. We'll see. The next morning, the tension between Emily and Davis finally boiled over. They were doing partner drills, moving as a pair across a mock village while taking out designated targets. Davis had been paired with her, and from the start he treated her like dead weight. Move faster, he barked after she paused to check their flank. You're slowing me down. That's called covering you, she shot back. He snorted. Please, I've been doing this long enough to know you're just... The sharp crack of simulated enemy fire cut him off. Davis froze for a split. Second, too long. Emily shoved him sideways behind cover, took a knee, and fired off 2 precise shots. The red training lights on the enemy targets blinked out. She turned to Davis. You were saying? His face flushed with something between embarrassment and anger, but he didn't answer. Later, in the debrief, Briggs singled her out. Heart, good reaction under fire. That's the kind of thinking that keeps people alive. Davis kept his eyes down. That night, Emily sat on her apartment floor, rifle across her lap, and thought about how quickly the week had changed. The whispers and jokes were still there, but something else had crept in, a grudging awareness. They were starting to see her not just as the girl with the wrong rifle, but as someone who wasn't going to break. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Mason's interest in her had more layers. The way he watched her sometimes, like he was measuring something she couldn't see. She didn't know yet that the next phase of training would push her past her limits and into a danger none of them were expecting. The third week of the specialized course began with no warning, just the shrill blast of a whistle in the dark. Emily jerked awake in her apartment to the sound of heavy boots in the hallway. When she opened the door, Briggs was there, flashlight, beam blinding her for a second. Here, now, he barked. You've got 90 seconds. Her training had taught her to move without thinking. Boots on, pants, jacket, sling rifle over her shoulder, pack ready by the door. 90 seconds. Felt like 10. But she was downstairs in the alley before the minute and a half was up. 7 others stood there too, half awake but alert. Davis looked irritated. Tyler looked like he was still trying to figure out what day it was. A transport truck rumbled into view, headlights cutting through the fog. Briggs pointed at the back. In? No one spoke during the ride. The hum of the engine and the rocking of the suspension made the silence heavy. Emily tried to gauge where they were going, but the roads twisted too much to keep track. When the truck finally stopped, they were deep in the hills north of Ironwood. The ground was frozen hard, the trees looming like dark sentinels in the mist. Mason was waiting for them by a small campfire. His breath clouded in the cold. "This is the break point," he said simply. 3 days out here. No shelter but what you build. No resupply. You fail. You walk back to base on your own. Briggs handed each of them a sealed envelope. Emily's was marked with a number in thick black ink. -4. Mason explained. Your envelopes contain specific coordinates. You'll have to reach them. Before sundown each day, complete the task there and move on. Nobody else needs to know your coordinates. That's part of the test. Trust no one, but work together when you have to. The enemy is out there. Not pretend. Not a drill. You'll know them when you see them. There was a murmur among the group, but no one dared ask for clarification. When they broke off to start, Emily tore open her envelope and memorized the numbers before tucking it deep in her jacket. She adjusted her pack straps and started out into the trees, compass in hand. The cold seeped into her gloves as she picked her way over rocks and through patches of brittle underbrush. The sound of wind in the branches was constant, but she kept her ears tuned for anything unnatural. A footstep, a branch snapping dot around midday. She heard voices ahead, low, muffled, moving. She crouched behind a fallen tree and saw 2 figures in dark camo, not from their group. They were armed with paintball rifles, but the way they moved was deliberate, practiced. These were the enemy Mason had warned. About. She waited until they passed, and took a long, slow route around them. When she reached her coordinates, she found a steel ammo box chained to a post. Inside was a single strip of cloth, deep green, with a snake emblem stitched in black thread. A viper, insignia. She held it in her hand for a long moment before tucking it into her pocket. Night fell fast in the hills. Emily built a low shelter from pine boughs and branches, keeping the fire small to avoid drawing attention. She'd just settled in when a noise behind her made her freeze. A rustle, too close to be wind. "Relax," came a low whisper. Tyler stepped into the dim firelight, shivering. "I lost my bearings. Can I stay near your fire?" She hesitated. The rules said trust no one. But leaving him out there alone didn't sit right. "Fine," she said, "but keep watch half. The night, you hear anything, you wake me." He nodded quickly, grateful. The second day was worse. The temperature dropped and a freezing mist rolled in. Visibility was barely 30 feet. Twice she had to dive for cover when enemy patrols came too close. By late afternoon, she stumbled across Davis, sitting against a tree, clutching. His ankle. "Twisted it," he said through clenched teeth. "I'm not making it to my checkpoint." She studied him for a moment. They weren't friends. He'd mocked her from day one. But something in Mason's voice when he'd talked about sacrifice stuck in her head. She dug out a strip of cloth from her pack and wrapped his ankle tight. "Lean on me. We're getting you there." It was slow going, and by the time they reached his coordinate point, she was almost out of daylight. She had to sprint the last mile to reach her own. When she got there, The box was already gone. In its place was a note, scrawled in thick black marker. Vipers adapt. See you tomorrow. On the third day, the enemy came for real. Emily was making her way down a narrow draw when the crack of a paintball rifle exploded against the rock beside her. She dropped low, rolling behind cover. Another shot splattered, red just inches from her boot. She could hear footsteps approaching, fast, precise. Whoever was out there knew she was pinned. She drew in a slow breath, remembering her father's words. Calm your mind. Control the shot. When the figure appeared, she didn't fire right away. She waited until he was fully in the open. Then one clean shot to the chest plate. The man grunted, dropped his rifle, and raised both hands. Nice shot, he said. She didn't recognize him, but the way he smiled was unsettling, like he knew more than she did. That night, when they were all back at the base, Mason called them into the briefing room. You're here because you didn't quit, he said. But some of you are here because someone else refused to leave you behind. Remember that. His eyes flicked briefly to Emily, then away. She didn't realize it yet, but the breakpoint had done more than test her endurance. It had marked her, in Mason's eyes, as someone who might survive the real thing. And soon, the real thing was coming. The week after the break, Point felt almost calm by comparison. The weather warmed slightly. Drills were back on base, and the rhythm was predictable again. Emily didn't trust it for a second. The others seemed to relax, though. Davis still kept his distance, but no longer made little digs at her. Tyler had started shadowing her during drills, sometimes asking questions about her shooting technique. She didn't mind. It reminded her of her early days with her father, listening more than talking. On Wednesday morning, they were in the middle of close-quarters drills when Mason's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. Course. Dismissed. Heart with me. The rest of the group exchanged glances as she followed him across the range and into the administrative building. His stride was quick, purposeful. Inside his office, the blinds were drawn. A low hum came from the old radiator in the corner. Mason closed the door behind her and dropped into his chair. There's a situation, he said without preamble. A veteran from this base, Staff Sergeant Ray Harlan, has gone missing. Emily frowned. Missing? Mason nodded. His truck was found near the edge of the old training grounds out by Mill Creek. His personal rifle's gone. No sign of him. Local law enforcement thinks it's a hiking accident, but Harlan wasn't the kind to get lost. Emily waited for the part where this involved her. This isn't an official assignment, Mason continued, but Harlan was one of mine. And the last person he called before disappearing was me. That landed heavy. You're asking me to. She started. I'm telling you we're going to take a little drive, he said. And I'm taking you because you see things other people miss. Mill Creek was 20 miles north, past the rolling farmland and into thick woods. The old training grounds had been decommissioned years ago, too remote, too costly to maintain. But the layout was still etched in Mason's memory. The dirt road ended at a rusted gate, padlock hanging broken. Someone wanted in, Emily said. Mason nodded. Or out. They walked past the gate, rifles slung but ready. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of wet earth and pine. Somewhere in the distance, water trickled over rocks. It didn't take long to find the first sign. A set of boot prints, deep in the mud. 2 people, Emily said, crouching. One heavier, the other dragging something. She followed. The marks a few yards before spotting the torn edge of green fabric. She picked it up, a strip of sleeve with the faint outline of a snake emblem. Mason's jaw tightened. That's Harlan's. They moved deeper into the woods, following the tracks until the sound of running water grew louder. A narrow footbridge crossed the creek, The board slick with moss. Halfway across, Emily froze. A fresh paintball impact marked the railing. She scanned the tree line and saw him. A man in dark gear, half hidden behind a cedar trunk, rifle up. Not paintball this time. Down. Mason hissed. They dropped low as the crack of a real bullet split the air above them. Emily's heart thudded. That's not an exercise. No, Mason said grimly. It's not. The next hour was a blur of careful movement, shifting from cover to cover, tracking the shooter without being seen. Twice they caught glimpses. Tall, lean, moving. Like someone who knew the terrain. When they reached the far ridge, they found signs of a camp, still warm. A pot of coffee on a small propane stove, and a folded map with 3 points circled, including the very spot they stood on. Emily studied. This wasn't random. No, Mason agreed. This is planned. He picked up the map, and it's got Viper markers. She looked at him sharply. You think Harlan's with them? Mason didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, I think Harlan may be in trouble with people who used to be Vipers. And that makes this a lot more dangerous than you realize. By the time they returned to base, dusk was falling. Mason sent her home without another word. But Emily couldn't shake the image of that green insignia in her pocket. She cleaned her rifle slowly, methodically. The whole time, her mind circled one thought. If the Vipers were real, and not just an elite ghost story, then someone out there knew she was training like them. And maybe they didn't want her to finish. The morning after the Mill Creek search, Emily arrived at the range early, hoping for a quiet hour before the others showed up. The air was cold enough that her breath came out in clouds, and frost glittered on the shooting benches. She was halfway through her first magazine when she sensed she wasn't alone. The hairs on her neck stood up before she even heard the sound, a soft crunch of gravel behind her. Nice grouping. A voice said. Emily turned. It wasn't Mason or Briggs. It was a man she'd never seen before, tall, lean, in a plain black jacket. His face was hard to place, the kind that could disappear in a crowd. You military? She asked. He smiled faintly. Once, long time ago. His eyes flicked to her rifle. You run that setup because it's comfortable, or because Kane taught you? Emily tightened her grip on the rifle. What's it to you? The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. It's to me because you're walking a path you don't understand. And if you keep going, you'll find out the hard way what the word Viper really means. Before she could respond, he turned and walked off, disappearing into the morning haze. When Mason arrived an hour later, she told him exactly what had happened. He listened, his jaw tightening. Did he give a name? No, Emily said. Mason. Swore under his breath. That's Cutter, ex-Viper. Went rogue years ago. If he's here, this is worse than I thought. Emily waited. Worse how? Mason leaned against the bench, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Cutter's not just some washed-up vet. He knows things. He's been trying to pull old Vipers into whatever he's building, and some of them are dangerous enough to take down a base. The weight of his words settled between them. And Harlan? She asked quietly. If Cutter's got him, Mason said, he's either recruiting him or using him. The day's training felt different after that. Every sound seemed sharper, every shadow longer. Davis noticed her distraction and made a comment about her losing her edge, but she let it slide. Tyler, though, caught her eye during a break. You okay? He asked. She hesitated, then just said, yeah, just a lot on my mind. He nodded, not pushing. That night, Emily was locking up her apartment when she heard it, the faint scrape of a boot on the alley. Pavement below. She froze, scanning the shadows. Who's there? She called. No answer. As she backed toward her door, rifle in hand. Then, from the corner of the alley, something slid into view. A folded piece of paper, tossed under the dim streetlight. Emily glanced around once more, then stepped forward to pick it up. Inside, in sharp block letters, were 6 words. Your instructor can't protect you forever. Her hands tightened on the paper until it crumpled. The next morning, Mason didn't seem surprised when she showed him. He's trying to get in your head, he said. Don't let him. Emily studied him. Why me? I'm not even finished. Training. You are if Cutter thinks you are, Mason said quietly. Later that day, the group was running live fire drills in the mock village. Emily was covering the eastern alley when she caught a flicker of movement at the far fence line. Too far for anyone in the exercise. Too quick for one of the trainers. Without taking her eyes off the spot, she keyed her radio. Mason, we've got company outside the perimeter. Static. No answer. A split second later, the distant crack of a rifle echoed off the plywood walls. This wasn't part of the drill. Emily's training took over. She moved low, hugging the shadows, circling toward where the shot had come from. Through the gaps in the fencing, she caught a glimpse of someone slipping into the tree line. Tall, lean, black jacket. Cutter. She could have taken a shot. But Mason's voice in her head stopped her. A real viper knows when not to pull the trigger. She watched him vanish into the trees. And for the first time, she realized this wasn't just about passing a course anymore. It was about survival. It was just after midnight when the base siren wailed. Emily was already awake, sitting on the edge of her bed with a rifle across her knees. The words on Cutter's note still etched in her mind. The siren's long rising cry meant one thing. Perimeter breach. She was out the door in under a minute, boots hitting the stairs 2 at a time. The night air was sharp, carrying the smell of diesel from the generator. Shadows from the floodlights cut deep lines across the gravel yard. Mason was already at the motor pool, pulling on a tactical vest. Hart, you're with me. They moved fast toward the east fence line. A section of wire was curled back. The chain link cut clean. On the other side, the trees swallowed the light. Briggs knelt by the gap, holding up something small, a spent rifle casing. Not ours, he said. Mason's voice was low, clipped. Cutter. They pushed into the woods in a tight formation, flashlights off. The moon was thin, but bright enough to paint the frost in silver. Every sound seemed louder, the crunch of leaves, the snap of twigs under boots. Half a mile in, they found the first sign. A flashlight beam swept over it, a small metal box, propped open on a log. Inside, an old military patch, a snake on a dark field. Mason picked it up. He's baiting us. Emily kept her rifle ready, eyes scanning the trees. Why? Because he wants to draw me out, Mason said. Then, almost as an afterthought, and now you. The deeper they went, the colder it felt. Somewhere ahead, a faint light flickered. Between the trees, they approached slow, circling until the camp came into view. It was small, just a tarp strung between 2 trees, a fire barely alive. And sitting beside it, hands tied, was Ray Harlan. Emily felt her stomach tighten. It's him. Harlan's head was down, but when Mason stepped forward, he looked. Up. Mason, you shouldn't have come. A voice came from the darkness beyond the fire. I told you we'd meet, Kane. Cutter stepped into the light, rifle in hand, the black jacket now dusted with frost. His eyes went straight to Emily. And this must be your protégé. You've trained her well. For a course that isn't supposed to exist anymore. Mason kept his rifle low but ready. Let him go, Cutter. Cutter smiled faintly. I will. But first, I want her to hear the truth. Emily's pulse was steady, but her mind was turning fast. The truth about what? About the vipers, Cutter said. About how your instructor isn't telling you the whole story. About how we weren't just soldiers, we were weapons. Disposable. And when they were done with us, they buried. The name and pretended we'd never existed. Mason's voice was sharp. That's enough. But Cutter kept going, his tone calm, almost conversational. You think you're training to be one of us? You're training to be a ghost. To do things no one will ever admit happened. And when it's over, you'll be standing alone, wondering if any of it mattered. The fire popped softly. The woods felt too quiet. Emily didn't lower her rifle. If you hate it so much, why try to pull me into it? Cutter's smile faded. Because the people coming for this base won't care about your choice. And when the smoke clears, the only ones still breathing will be the ones who've learned the Viper way. Before Mason could reply, a burst of automatic fire tore through the trees from the west. The sound was close, too close. Cutter didn't flinch. Looks like my friends are early. In the confusion, he stepped back into the shadows and was gone. Mason cursed and moved toward Harlan, cutting him loose. We're moving now. The sprint back to the perimeter was chaos. Whoever was in the trees wasn't shooting to miss. Rounds cracked through branches overhead, snapping wood, kicking up dirt at their heels. Emily kept low, covering their rear, her rifle barked sharp in the cold night. She saw movement to her left, a shadow sliding between trees, and squeezed the trigger. The figure dropped, their weapon clattering. By the time they hit the fence gap, Briggs and two others were holding the line, floodlights blinding anyone trying to come through. Harlan stumbled into the light, pale but on his feet. Emily followed, her chest heaving, eyes still locked on the tree line. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it began. Whoever had been out there was gone. Back inside the motor pool, Mason finally looked at her. You kept your head. That's why you're still here. Emily set her rifle down on the bench, the weight of Cutter's words pressing heavier than the gear on her shoulders. If he was right, then finishing this training wouldn't just make her a better soldier. It might turn her into something she wasn't ready to be. The morning light filtered weakly through the blinds of Mason's office, casting long stripes over the cluttered desk. Emily sat across from him, exhausted but restless. The events of last night weighed on her, heavier than any gear she'd carried. She broke the silence first. Why didn't you tell me about the Vipers? Mason's eyes darkened. Because you didn't need to know. Not yet. Emily shook her head. I was supposed to be ready. I trained like one of them. Yet you kept me in the dark about the people. Cutter called disposable. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Vipers weren't just a unit. They were a weapon forged in secret. A kind of soldiers who did what no one else could, missions no one would acknowledge. She studied him closely, the weight of years hidden behind those eyes. And you? Were you one of them? He hesitated, then nodded. I was. And I left because I saw what we were becoming. But some never left. Cutter's one of those. He believes the only way to survive is to keep the old ways alive, ruthless, silent, and unbreakable. Emily's fingers curled into a fist. So the training, it's not about skill. It's about surviving what comes after. Yes? Mason's voice was quiet but steady. It's about becoming someone who can walk through fire and not burn. Someone who can stand alone and still fight. Outside, the base was waking up. Soldiers moved about, unaware of the fragile calm resting on the edge of a deeper storm. Emily left the office with more questions than answers. Cutter's words echoed in her mind, about being ghosts, about choices and consequences. She walked to the firing range, rifle in hand, as if grounding herself in the only thing she truly trusted. Tyler was there already, watching the targets. She joined him silently. He glanced over. You look like you wrestled a bear last night. She smiled, weakly. Feels like it. He nodded, then surprised her by saying, "You've got people who believe in you. You know." Emily looked away, feeling the weight of that belief. "I'm not sure if I believe in myself yet." Later that afternoon, Mason called her back to his office. "This," he said, sliding a folder across the desk, "is Cutter's plan." Emily opened it. Photos, maps, notes, all detailing a covert attempt to infiltrate the base and steal classified intel. "Why now?" she asked. Mason looked her straight in the eye. "Because Cutter thinks the Vipers are still needed." "That?" "The world still requires what we were trained to do. In shadows, without rules." She closed the folder with a snap. "And if we don't stop him, then this base, everything we've built, will fall into hands that won't hesitate to use it." That night, Emily sat alone by the fire pit, the cold air biting at her skin. She stared into the flames, thinking about all she'd lost and gained. The mocking laughter from the first day, the doubts, the near-death moments, they all led here. She wasn't just fighting for respect anymore. She was fighting for justice. For the people like Harlan caught in the middle. For the truth Mason had almost hidden. For herself. As the fire died down, she made a decision. Tomorrow, she would face Cutter and whatever ghosts still haunted the woods. And this time, she wouldn't be running. The dawn was pale and gray as Emily stood at the edge of the old training grounds, rifle slung but ready. Mason was beside her, silent but steady, a steady anchor in the shifting shadows. The cold seeped through her jacket, but her hands were steady. This was the moment she had been preparing for. Not just the fight, but the reckoning. "We find Cutter," Mason said quietly. "We end this." Emily nodded. No more running. They moved through the trees, shadows stretching long across the ground. The forest was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed, and from behind a cluster of oaks, Cutter stepped out, rifle raised but steady. His eyes were cold, but not without a flicker of respect. "So, Cutter," sighed, voice low, "you've come back." The student ready to face the master. Emily held her ground. "It's not about being a master or a student anymore. It's about stopping you." Cutter smiled thinly. "You think you can stop what? You don't understand." Words gave way to action. The forest exploded with gunfire, rapid, precise. Emily moved like a shadow herself, every step practiced, every breath controlled. She found cover behind a fallen log and fired, not to kill, but to disable. Mason covered her flank, moving with the calm of a man who'd been in this fight before. Cutter retreated deeper, drawing them toward the old command bunker, a relic from decades ago. Half swallowed by earth and vines. Inside the bunker, the air was stale, but the stakes were fresh. Cutter stood in the dim light, flanked by a few loyalists, men and women who hadn't left the Viper Code behind. "Last chance," Mason said. "Stand down." Cutter shook his head. "This isn't just about me. It's about a legacy that refuses to die." Emily stepped forward. "Legacies change. People change. You're holding on to a past that's already gone." There was no more talking. The firefight was tense, close quarters. Emily's training kicked in, every shot calculated, every move fluid. One by one, Cutter's followers fell, until only he remained, cornered. Breathing hard, Cutter lowered his rifle. "You've got the strength I never saw in myself," he admitted. Emily lowered hers, the fire in her eyes steady. "You taught me more than you know. But it's time to end this." Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting light on the battered training grounds. Back at the base, Emily stood before her fellow soldiers and instructors. No more whispers, no more mockery. Mason stepped forward, nodding at her. "Hart," he said simply, "you trained like a viper. But more importantly, you trained like a leader. Applause broke out, quiet at first, then growing louder. Emily smiled, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. She'd fought not just for respect, but for truth, for justice, for herself. Months later, Emily stood at the edge of Mill Creek, the water flowing steady and clear. The viper patch hung in her locker now, a symbol not of fear, but of strength. Reclaimed, she reached into the water, tossing a smooth stone across the surface. As the ripples spread, she whispered, "This is only the beginning."